And I'm Bob Scuderi, and working with Mission Nation Publishing, and our commitment is to help strengthen the church in America by giving a voice to the new missionaries. And one of the initiatives that we've had is to help congregations be successful in reaching an ethnic group different from their own. And that's what sparked this conversation today. That others might learn some of the things to do and maybe some of the things not to do as we go along. For the discussion today, we've put together a few questions that are suggested questions. We probably won't get to them all, that's okay. And Terry is going to lead the discussion of the questions. So Terry, why don't you begin?
Okay, Bob had asked me to share a few thoughts at the beginning. When I first received his list of questions, a whole bunch of thoughts came to mind right away. And there's four major points I'd like to share. I just want to begin by asking the first point, which is why? Why are we interested in reaching a culture other than our own, or one that is different than our own? And some of the reasons might be a spiritual catalyst, that somehow we have just been touched by God. The scriptures have influenced us, the power of the Holy Spirit have worked in our heart, and we just see a great opportunity to reach out to people who are different than us. And so it could be a spiritual catalyst that we want to be a witness. And how can we be a witness to others? Oftentimes we think about going out overseas or going out to other people. We think about the Great Commission, go and make disciples. And that is a part of our witness. There's also a part of our witness that is just simply being a witness, being who we are, that God has made us, and letting that light shine and being a reflection of that vertical relationship between us and God. And I'm always reminded about John chapter 12, after Lazarus was raised from the dead. In chapter 12, there's Lazarus sitting with Jesus, and all these religious leaders came to Jesus. And it wasn't really just to see Jesus, but it was to see, hey, is that Lazarus guy? Is he really alive? And Lazarus didn't have to say a thing. He was simply there. He was present. He was being a part of that wonderful witness. And that can be a very powerful thing. So what are the reasons? And hopefully it is because of a spiritual catalyst, a conviction that God wants us to be reaching out to others. But there are other reasons why people might engage in this. Some reasons for a congregation is because perhaps the congregation is declining, or perhaps they are aging. We need more people to pay the bills, or let's rent out our facilities and generate some income. And by itself, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad strategy necessarily, but it can be much more intentional and much more fruitful, such as starting intentional ministry or planting a church. And then another reason for why we might engage in this is simply our neighborhood is changing, gentrification. There are some new people or different generations of people or different cultures. And so those are things we might observe happening gradually in our midst. And so those are some of my first thoughts about this first question. Why? Why are we engaged in this? What is our interest? Any thoughts on this first point?
You bring a lot of good things to light. I kind of cringe when I hear people saying we need to fill the pews because we need to pay the bills, and boy, that just grates on me. But you know what? I know that the Lord will work good through everything. Anything that will help people get the word out. But I tend to look at it from a historical perspective too, and I took these questions or this question rather personally, and I'm like, even as an American, and maybe I'm more than your average patriot, I don't know, but I see this as the future of America. You know, my relatives came here not more than 4, maybe 5 generations ago, and depending on which side of the family, and boy, that they have really contributed a lot. They fought in wars, they helped with industry, and you know, just it goes on and on. And I think our future is based upon the immigrants. Also, when I look at the average age of the typical Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, or any of your mainstream denominations, the average age of the person in the pews is closer to their 70s than 60s. And our congregation, the Hispanic congregation, the Pelican, the average age is 47, and so that's a huge difference. That's a generation and a half difference, you know, possibly. So I have other things, suggestions too, but I want to open up the floor to anybody else who would like to chime in.
You know, Mark, we are a nation of immigrants. There is no one ethnic group that owns this country.
Right.
When I was in St. Louis, I got into the archives and read about how in the 19th century, the yellow journalism was talking about Germans sleeping in garages all over St. Louis and fomenting political unrest and crime. And that's the way it's been with every immigrant generation that's come.
Sure, but I think that the spiritual catalyst is most important, of course, and that's the one that wins the day. And so many other things can fit under that category. You know, just various things, motives. As we are engrafted shoots, so also we should. Why should we not engraft other shoots? You know, wild shoots or whatnot. How many of our families in the LCMS have been in the Lutheran Church for more than 3 generations? I venture to guess very, very few when you look back 60 years. A lot of new people still come in, maybe from the Methodist Church or whatnot. But, you know, for me, it's really all about finding unbelievers. So for me, the motive is really so much more legacy. Again, not necessarily a very just cause, but some congregations, they see themselves drying up and closing up, especially as others have done already. And for them, it might be a matter of what's our legacy going to be. You know, let's go out with at least mission on our headstone. You know, so.
I've served churches out in Scottsdale, Arizona, and in Michigan, now in Florida. And the only consistent thing that I see is every community has got their pockets of ethnic groups. And it appeared to me several times that the division was the church. We have our church, you have your church. And when the churches are coming together, and I'm not necessarily saying in the pews, but in the events, in the fellowship, in the getting together, the more they came together almost outside the church, the better they got along inside the church. And you know, I had a mentor many years ago when we talked about this very thing. How can we, you know, what does our church look like? And he had the great analogy of, does the people in your church look like the people that are at the grocery store? And, you know, and what that is you go to the local grocery store, you see almost virtually every nationality walking around. And when you go back to your church, you're looking in the mirror. You're not seeing that. And that had always stuck with me. Does my church look like my local grocery store? And that's just something that I've always embraced. And that's always been a goal of mine, to make sure that we are the community. And so that's one of the areas, that's one of the perspectives I look at when it comes to kind of, you know, taking that test of who is in your church and why are they there. Certainly our churches are getting older. Our churches are worried about closing, which they are. They're closing at a fast rate, but they don't have to. Because there's so many people looking for a place to worship.
That thought you just shared, I used to think that quite a bit, that if we're just reflective of our community, that would be fine. Except that there are so many of the communities that are not not diverse. They're mostly homogeneous.
Yeah.
And so if you are in a community where 93% is white, you would think, okay, well, if I can get 7% of people in the community into my congregation, that might be good enough. And I'm starting to get challenged on that concept, because even if you were in a real rural area, there might be a opportunity to specialize your congregation into being that one that might reach out to this particular group. And it doesn't have to be limited to just a reflection of the community. It could be explosively, fantastically, the place where everyone identifies it, that, hey, that's the church that welcomes our people. And it could be much greater than that. So, but thank you for those thoughts. Any other thoughts on point one? And otherwise, I'll move on to point two. Yes.
I would like to add one more thing. And of course, this fits under the spiritual catalyst, the motive of the Holy Spirit. But recognizing that God always directed his people to care for widows and orphans. And most ethnic groups are here because they have come out of bad situations at home. Venezuela, Cuba, could be the Middle East. There have been all kinds of tragedies and things that are on the news for 6 months, and then boom, they just disappear. But then the people are here. And we have to remember, these people are the widows and orphans of a homeland, of a patria, as we say in Spanish, and they're here. But also, in addition to that, many of these people did not have a spirituality where they were at. If they came from a highly affluent nation like ours, they might be as atheistic or as whatever, non-spiritual as many of our people here, or from Cuba or North Korea or something else. But the thing is that they're going to come here into a huge spiritual vacuum, or maybe a spiritual chaos, and who knows who's going to get to them first. And I think we have a responsibility too, to recognize that these people in a spiritual buffet, in smorgasbord spirituality, are not going to leave here vacant. They're going to leave this world with some spirituality, and doggone it better be Christianity. It's really up to us, So, I mean, that's another big thing I see, is that with all the spirituality here, they're going to end up as Mormons or Jehovah's or Wicca if some good Christian doesn't get to them first. And, it's God made us spiritual beings. We're basically spiritual beings in the physical world. So
people are coming to America for all kinds of reasons. And we know that there are people who come because they are refugees who are coming out of traumatic kind of situations. There are also many who are coming over as international students. We have over 1 million international students here in America, and reaching that population is a wonderful thing to do, because even though they may be returning to their homeland, they actually can take the gospel with them back into some parts of the world we can never reach.
Right.
And they're coming over for employment reasons. They're coming to America to be the missionaries now, right, Bob? Mission Nation. God is sending missionaries from other countries to America. Yes, so some great opportunities there. Question number two, or my second point, is, what does reaching out to a culture different than your own? What does that look like? It might be where we have an ethnic or a language specific or a nationality specific kind of ministry. So maybe like in Mike's congregation, you started a Hispanic and Haitian kind of thing, ministry, and so that might be very ethnic oriented, ethnic specific, language specific, nationality specific, and oftentimes I see that as being a half step, that it is more of a subunit. And so those ministries, are they from other denominational groups? Are they part of LCMS? Are they, if they are, is it considered one congregation, or are they a subunit part of the congregation? And however that's structured, it's all right. But a full step in terms of reaching culture other than your own may be more reflective of becoming multi-ethnic. And the book refers to this 80-20 division percentage of what is a multi-ethnic versus a non-multi-ethnic or a homogeneous church. And so that's something to consider. Being ethnic specific, once those generations become more English proficient, or the English becomes their primary language, then it becomes an opportunity to become more multi-ethnic. And so the ethnic specific part is more of a half step. So your thoughts on that idea?
Well, I know with us, with the, I speak no Creole, and I speak even less Spanish. And so for me to communicate just walking up and talking is difficult. But we have, it's amazing how the bond that we have, we all know it comes from the love of our Lord. We are starting even small catechism classes. We've ordered through Lutheran Nation, I think it's called, or it's up in Macomb, Michigan. We got the Creole in, or the Luther Small Catechism in Creole, and we're waiting for the books to come in Spanish. But that just the small little bit of training is going to take us from that, because we are all one church. We all are members of Peace Lutheran Church. We are actually going through the membership classes. As slow as that is, it's an incredible time where we are starting to get to know each other. They're understanding me better. They're understanding my culture. I'm understanding their culture. But we have that single point of reference, and that's Jesus. And it all is growing from there. And it's incredible that the language barriers really are not a big deal. You know, and it's fascinating to see how eager they are to assimilate into our culture as much as we are eager to assimilate into their culture. And we are actually planning a large worship service this November, where it's going to be led by all three of us. You know, going to have a Haitian pastor, an LCMS pastor, well, they're all LCMS, myself, and the Hispanic, and we're going to take different portions of the worship service, and we're all going to worship together. I have no idea how we're going to pull this off. It should be a blast. So
that's really exciting.
That is. That's amazing.
I could see us maybe this sermon is in English, but different Bible readings in different languages, and when we sing the songs, everybody sings in their own language. The picture of Revelation 7:9.
You know, the challenge of how to start this or how to add something on, I still don't have the answer to that. But 5 years ago, when I arrived in Naples, I was strongly encouraged by members of the Mother Church, very, very invested members of the Mother Church, and a few others, that I should start an Anglo church, you know, a North American English-speaking church first, in order to fund the future Spanish church. Well, I tell you, I've seen it so many times that I thought, boy, if we could ever start the Spanish church right off the bat as the main course, rather than a possibly welcome or unwelcome side dish. You know, I'd love to do that. Plus, being one who started to learn the language at 41, and after 6 months started to lose it very quickly, I knew that we needed to start in Spanish if I was going to do it at all, you know. Otherwise, I was afraid, based on the sinful nature, that I would become very comfortable in the English church that we started, and that would work out so well, you know, trusting in the Lord's blessings and goodness, that I would never really truly want to start the other one. And no sooner had we started that, and we had a Haitian pastor, Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod Haitian pastor, looking for a place to worship. So now he is in our place. And that was the challenge also. The Hispanics, you know, they said, this is our home, this is our church. Hispanics and Haitians don't always get along real well in society, you know. And so we said, they're here, we're going to work with it. And I've always tried to keep it so that we didn't have too much overlap, but we do some things together each year. And it's really wonderful. The Easter dinner that we've always had. Well, last year we didn't have it, but, and I think there's a Christmas thing that we do together. But again, it's not a natural thing, but I'm glad we do that. And even though I'm North American, I've been investing my time as soon as we got some good guys who we could identify as solid believers and Lutherans. We've been investing in equipping them to be future leaders, because I personally still think that the Hispanics will reach the Hispanics better than an Anglo boy like me, you know. But I mean, at the same time, there are benefits to that, which we might talk about later on, just based on different issues within these groups, tribalism and stuff too.
Mark, don't you think that's essential? That the first order of reaching an ethnic group different from your own would be to raise up a leader from among that group. In order to do that, you have to be somehow ministering to that community,
Right.
So that people in the community see the love of Christ in you. But if it's really going to succeed, you really need to bring somebody on as, how are you doing that, Pastor Mike? Is that, are you bringing those two leaders on as deacons? Is that what you're doing? And then what?
No, actually, I've had quite a bit of discussions with the district office, and President Walton has been very gracious in his time. And I've spoken with Peter Meyer, I've spoken with the seminaries, and really for these gentlemen, because they are working full time, they have families here, they have, they can't pick up and go to the seminary for even for a couple of years. We've opted that the SMP program would be the perfect route for these gentlemen to go. We are in.
What is SMP? What is SMP?
SMP is the acronym for Specific Ministry Pastor. It is when a church has a need for a pastor and doesn't necessarily have the ability to perhaps call somebody at a normal route. Maybe in this particular case, we have ethnic groups that I cannot minister to because I just don't have the language, nor the time to actually go out and do this, is because I have my congregation. So a specific ministry pastor is a distance education, something akin to Delta from a few years ago, where they would get most of their education online. They will still have to go to the seminary a couple different times, just for a month or so at a time. But that pastor, once he's ordained, will be assigned to that specific ministry, and he will be a pastor there, unlike a general pastor that can take a call anywhere in the country. An SMP pastor has all the same education and qualifications. He will actually work under me as the supervising pastor, and he will take all of his classes online. And Mark and I are partnering on this, and we're going to kind of tag team their education and their mentoring. And and as a matter of fact, in about another month, our church is actually going to vote on calling both of these gentlemen, and they will be vicars at Peace Lutheran Church in the SMP program.
Oh, praise God. That's huge. Oh, man.
The
We should let you go on vacation more. Go on, say that again, Terry.
The SMP program is proving to be quite effective for raising up pastors and training pastors.
Heck yeah.
And I'm very thankful that the LCMS has several different routes that can be taken, both residential and distance components. Great. Let's move on to my third point, and it's the question, who is in charge? We talk about working with other groups cross-culturally, or really more interculturally. And we recognize that it's really a privilege. And we begin to ask ourselves, who has the privilege? Oftentimes, if you were kind of in a place of renting your facility, it's like if you are renting a room in a house. If you rent a room in a house, you may or may not have kitchen privileges, or you have certain rooms you can use and certain things you cannot needs.
Amen. Right.
And so it becomes, when you're sharing a facility, when you're utilizing and share space, whose church is it? Who has privilege and to what degree? That's something to recognize.
Yes.
And it really goes back to something called cultural dominance or cultural preference. Who's the majority group there? Who's the ethnic group there? And how does that interact? How does that play? And basically, it's really about culture formation. And so we talk about things like enculturation, acculturation, assimilation, and amalgamation. These are all different cultural terms that help us to understand culture more. So enculturation is like a blank sheet, whereas acculturation is where you travel and you're exposed to other cultures. And assimilation is where you begin to acquire some new cultures, and that new culture becomes a part of you. And amalgamation is more of where it's even biological and genetic. Intermarriage, for example, would have aspects of that, where your children may have different cultures. And so those are some of the questions and issues that we will see and experience in this idea of reaching a culture other than your own. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's interesting because I see with the three ministries, I see a little bit of every one of those.
Mhm.
And the fascinating thing is that certainly the Haitian pastor and the Hispanic pastor, just out of professional courtesy, give me the right of way, if you will. But we're developing this relationship where we are partners. Yes, there's a hierarchy of leadership. Yes, I'm called to be the senior pastor, so obviously we'll have to make some decisions. But what we've been finding is that the more we get to know each other, the more latitude we give each other, the more trust we're developing. It's hard. It really is, especially early on, because the Haitian ministry, for example, they're there for 5 hours. Try to hold a typical LCMS in your congregation for 5 hours. Have a fight on you. But they, you get to say, okay, guys, it's time, we got to go, and a perfect example is last week, even with COVID, we started our first adult Bible study. And then we had a meeting, we were going to go into the sanctuary, and they're going, well, they're still in there, but we respect that and understand that. And I think that the biggest challenge right now is as they are assimilating to what's going on in our environment, we more importantly have to assimilate into theirs and be sensitive to what they may be feeling, because we've all been on vacation in different places and didn't know what to do. And they're really, we want to remove that walking on eggshells for them to feel that this is their home. But it's hard.
The last question is related to what I describe as intercultural relational leadership development, IRLD. And really, when it comes to leadership, more often than not, it's really about relationships. It's really about team ministry, contextualizing the setting of how that leadership and that relationship is developed. It's about being intercultural. It's about ministry to, through, by, and beyond the people you're working with. It's really looking at one's own cultural intelligence, one's own cultural competence, and being willing to learn and grow from that. And when it comes to leadership development, is it a hierarchical kind of top-down? Is it a raising up of leaders from the bottom up, or is it more evenly across? And how is that expressed? Your thoughts on that?
Mm.
Well, I've observed really quickly how leaders are, cream rises to the top quickly. And I've seen already in both ministries how people are coming up to me now that they're getting to know me and
Mhm.
asking, how can I help? And the interesting thing, I've been working real hard at being with them, whether I can speak their language or not. We still know that, or they still know that as one big family, we need a plumber, we need a carpenter, we need a tax accountant, we need everybody, and the body, many parts.
Mhm.
So I've actually talked to the guys about preaching about this and talking about this, and let them know that we are. So, but the leadership training, I think you hit it right on, because it's all about relationships. And I have found with these communities that aren't as familiar with what we are, they don't, their trust, I don't want to say their trust level isn't there, but their trust level isn't there yet, because they don't know me. They don't know our culture. So until they know that, hey, look, I'm on your side, let's do this together. And I think that is the biggest lesson that I've learned, is to get rid of the titles, get rid of all of the fancy stuff, and just, sit down and talk and get to know each other and build the relationship. Because I would rather build on the things that we come together on than the things that we disagree on. And that's what I think has really been helping me.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that depending on the culture and how they view titles and those kinds of things, simply removing titles may actually be insulting to one culture.
Really?
Yes,
Okay. Well,
very much so. So depending on their cultural background and how, their worldview, and this is where you can read writings by Hosti, and who talks about power distance and how these things are viewed differently by different cultures. Um, we need to educate ourselves, is what I'm saying, about our cultural competence, our cultural intelligence, because if we're working with a specific group, we can study that group and learn to understand the culture. So, for example, an example would be where there was once a white congregation that started a Chinese ministry, a Chinese pastor and an Anglo pastor. Anglo pastors all lay back. The Chinese pastor comes into his office. The guy's got his feet up on the table, pointed at the Chinese pastor. That was very insulting to the Chinese pastor. That I would come in and talk to you, and you show your respect by putting your feet up on a table. So that's just a simple example of how we may misunderstand. And so we're coming from a culture, and we're saying we're dictating, we're telling them this is what the culture or what it should be like, and we're not allowing enough of the other culture to have a say, and therefore we are still dominating those other cultures in a certain setting. So we, that's one of the challenges that we face.
Yes. Yes.
that's a huge challenge. I've never even considered that. So I guess I'll keep my feet on the floor from now on. Thanks.
Well, only if they're Chinese.
I think that it's important to raise people up to be with you, and so that basically at the same level, but at the same time, like Mike said, let's how would you guys do this? How would you approach this? What's the Colombian way? What's the Venezuelan way? What's the Haitian way of doing this? And ask them, because many times we don't think of asking them. We say, well, here's how we do it in the Lutheran Church. Here's how we preach. Here's how we approach grace. Here's how we talk about the law, and boom, boom, boom. It's usually 3, 4, 5 points, and we got it all down, But with the mission and ethnic ministry, it really helps to say, how would you do this? And what do you think about this?
Right.
And that, I think, makes it more leadership,
Right. We can actually diminish another person's leadership, not so much in your relationship with him or her, but how their followers view that leader by certain issues where we approach that other leader, the other ethnic leader. The consequences are not in your relationship with him, it's how do the people see him. And
Yes,
and
right,
and that's the
right.
greater impact that we sometimes miss.
Are you
Right, yeah, I
saying,
was-
Terry, that sometimes the Anglo leader would, without knowing it, denigrate the ethnic leader there? Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
right. In the eyes of the ethnic leader's followers.
Followers. Mhm.
Right. So that relationship between the two leaders might be, oh, okay, I know you're like this and I'm like that. But in the eyes of the people, they might see it as a negative thing and have a negative impact.
Interesting.
Mark, how do you handle that? Is there something you do to hold up the arms of the other leaders?
I'm still learning, but yes, when I first met with a group of people that one of our Haitian deacons said he had, I said, well, how do you want to do this? How is this going to look? Who's going to speak first? And I've learned that through some chaplain training too, that when you're the first on the scene, you're the chaplain on the scene, you're not the insider, you're the outsider. You need to be introduced. You don't say, thanks for coming, everybody, which is our natural propensity. Thanks for coming. Welcome to our church. So we had the outsider who was really the insider because it's his group, his people. He welcomed them, thanked them, and I sat quietly by the side until he introduced me. And and it's very, very interesting because I could clearly have I hate to say stepped in it, but stepped in it and messed him up, embarrassed him, or shamed him in front of people. And the Haitian churches or the Haitians are one of those who have a very stratified, very ordered way of doing things. So, but with the Hispanics too, I like to say, well, what do you think? And sometimes we have conflict, maybe not sometimes, more often than not, we have a little bit of conflict, usually small conflict. I'm like, well, we can't do that here, or it's not going to work that way, and so, and then of course, sometimes by not putting enough rules, not thinking of things, you run into issues. What do you do when the family who's volunteered to cook lunch after church for the fellowship time cooks the lunch during the worship service? Of course you can't have that. That's not right. They need to be in worship. And so you have to establish ground rules, and things like that. So just fun stuff, but approaching it, I've learned to approach it with humility and recognizing that their culture is every bit as much as important as my culture when it comes to them, equipping them and discipling them. And really that's what it is. It's discipling. They're going to learn from us whether we do it right or whether we do it wrong. And what they're going to repeat is what they learned from us. It's like the old saying, what is your child learning from TV? And the lackadaisical or out of touch mom says, well, he's not teaching my child anything. It's not an educational program. Exactly. Still your child's learning something, the values. Anyway, so, discipling is happening. If you get involved, you're discipling, whether you know it or not.
Okay. We just scratched the surface of this topic and this issue. There are so many things. We could go on for hours and hours, but thank you so much for reacting to some of my thoughts and questions.